Hello, um, my name is Kermie Fang, and I'm gonna do something that I've been wanting to do for the longest time, constantly putting it off. Had always found more stuff to say, just lack of motivation sometimes. But finally, I'm here, and I want to give my comprehensive review of Goodbye Volcano High, a game that been on my mind since the longest time, ever since before it came out, and this review a bit afterwards, where pretty much played the game soon as almost as soon as it came out, and I like it. I like the game. I just want to preface everything by saying I like the game, and I want to love it. But I feel like there are multiple parts of this game that are flawed. Of course, there are some parts that I like, but I want to give my review to both better my understanding of this game and to put this out there so other people can help collaborate with me and talk about what they like about the game, what they don't like, so I can have just as well-rounded a review as possible and provide you with as well-rounded a review as possible. And going in, needlessly have to say, there is going to be spoilers regarding Goodbye Volcano High, obviously, and I'm also going to be mentioning Snoot Game and Night in the Woods, as I feel like comparing them and drawing back to them over the course of this review will help illustrate a lot of my points. And just to say this right now, this is not going to be a visually pleasing video. So if you're listening to this, it's the kind of stuff you just listen in the background, just listen to. I'll have visual aids every now and then, but don't expect any eye candy here. And I guess the first, and yeah, uh, needlessly, gonna say this. I'm gonna stutter quite a bit. I'm just that kind of guy. Public speaking, not my forte. But yapping absolutely is. And so getting into this, I want to just go ahead and explain my biases that could help or not help my review. Just putting it out there at the start. So to try to give the game as fair a chance as possible to see where I'm coming from, as it may impact the review. I'm trying to be as impartial as possible, but overall, I found out about GVH via Snoop Game. I use iFunny. I've been using iFunny since the longest time, and I saw after looking into it, that there was a demo. By the time I looked into it deeper, there was a demo of GVH already out by co-op, and so I played through it, and needless to say, it was pretty buggy. So my first experience into the game at all, not the greatest, but ultimately whatever. It's just a demo, and they're delaying the game. And come on, a studio is ought to perform and make a better game than just a bunch of 4chaners. So, I still remained optimistic. Of course, I had an eyebrow raise at certain parts, but overall optimistic. And final bias is how I am essentially a part of the LGBTQ, so some parts of this game may resonate personally with me, so I feel more attached to certain elements, more passionate. Where once again, I'm trying to remove as much as myself from this review to stay as unbiased and fair as possible, but just want to overall get this all out the way so I can just be as fair as I can with this game. And coming up is essentially a visual example, a screenshot I took when I first played the demo, where as you can see, that is not supposed to be like that. But going on, the first thing I want to discuss is the gameplay. After all, it is a game, but it not really is. It's a game in the most bare bones sense. It's a game. The game is realistically just a movie you can occasionally change dialogue in. And I don't mean this to try to discredit or knock down GVH. It's more so along the lines of a visual novel. And despite it, it still calls itself a game. And I still think of it as a game. And I don't think it any lesser that doesn't necessarily cater to the whole gameplay element of it. But, what better place to start by, looking into this game than its gameplay? And there are three core pillars in which the gameplay, where you can actually, play a game within GVH. That is through interacting with the various dialogue options, where throughout the story you're constantly prompted as Fang to go ahead and say specific things where you can say like a mean option or a nice option or ask a question about a certain thing, stuff to better interact with the story as you are put through it. And beyond that, there are rhythm segments where, Fang is necessarily playing a song, and you get to play with them as well by just going ahead and, well, I'll get into that later. But you also play with them through these rhythm segments and just various little mini games sprinkled throughout the game. And so, first thing I want to discuss to essentially break down the gameplay is by exploring the dialogue options. And one thing I do have to say I like about GVH is the way the dialogue is designed with its meta interface, where a big struggle I see for a lot of games like this, where they necessarily want to convey things where there's a dialogue option in the game that says something, but what the character says is much more than that. It's much grander. It's definitely longer, and you necessarily can't put everything they say into that one dialogue bubble because it just blowed up the entire screen. So you have to break it down to try to get at the core what the character is trying to say to convey to the player what exactly this character, if you pick this option, is going to say. And a way GVH circumvents that problem is that they implement a system where they play around with the dialogue bubbles, where they can make one dialogue option, on fire to show it reflecting Fang going to say it in a very fiery or passionate or angry tone or direction, or one that's very like bubbly, showing one that they're much more ambiguous on, or one that's much more like electricity, where they're going to be like really shocked or exaggerated about it. And this nice design choice conveys a lot about what they're going to say and what the option, if you choose it, will essentially be in the story. And I like that. I like that a lot. It's very clever. I will absolutely give them that. Dialogue essentially accomplishes two things in the game. When a player chooses it, dialogue can raise the affinity between Fang, the character you play as, and other characters within the story, as well as if you select the right dialogue option at the right moment, you can unlock special scenes that occur after a specific scene in the story that give you more time in exploration of a certain character. And one thing I have to say about the dialogue in of itself, that necessarily isn't the greatest. They don't exactly handle dialogue the best. By raising affinity, it does help, it makes sense, depending what dialogue options you choose. It does and should affect your relationship with certain characters. But to what ends? As in the game, affinity only affects two main things. It's one thing near the end of the game, and there are certain special scenes, the everything dialogue can unlock for you, that can only be accessed if your character is at a high enough affinity. Oh no, not even. It doesn't necessarily unlock special scenes. Sometimes it does, but it also unlocks special photos that you can then put in a photo gallery, which I will get to later. The whole photo gallery system. But that is essentially all affinity accomplishes. Just photos on occasion, and one moment right before the end of the game. And of course, unlocking special scenes, which are nice. Think of it like extra story to your story-based game. However, the special scenes, as well as affinity, don't really amount to much. Through dialogue, the way you interact with the story itself, it's a shame how it gives the player no greater impact on deciding the course of the story. Where because the story is so railroaded, no matter what the player chooses in dialogue, no matter how much affinity they raise or special scenes they unlock, the game is going to progress exactly the same, almost as if no matter what dialogue option was chosen, it all ends up to the same end result. I wish more could have been done with dialogue, as this is the main way in which you interact with the game itself. And just seeing how little this core tenet of the gameplay interacts with the game is disappointing, but overall, the game is essentially its story. It's more so a film being shown to you than a game you can interact with, and I understand that. But, if you're giving player choice through dialogue, I would expect it to have much greater impact on said story, where if you make your character as mean as you can try to possibly be, it shouldn't have the same end result as if you'd made your character as nice as they could possibly be. Beyond that, going on to the second core tenet of the gameplay, those being the rhythm segments. It happens whenever Fang is playing either alone or in a band, and as a matter of fact, the game starts off with a rhythm segment once, the original hook of them throwing the book into the fire, which I will get to when I discuss the overall story, but the game starts off with a rhythm segment. Problems are, one thing I have to say about these rhythm segments, they're too easy. I never play rhythm games. I've never really played them at all. And so when I played GVH, this was like my first time ever really playing a rhythm game or something with like a rhythm segment. However, I was able to get Virtuoso, an achievement that's given to you if you score 90% or higher on every single rhythm segment. Like you hit like 90% of notes or 80%. But even then, it's an impressive achievement, no matter what the exact percentage is if I get it wrong. And it shouldn't be that easy for someone like me who's never really played like games like this or done gameplay like this to get such a skilled achievement so easily. But why is it so easy, you may ask? It's simple. It's flawed by its button configuration. There are only 3 possible ways to interact with the rhythm segment. A ball at the bottom that you control its direction with the joystick to move into incoming balls for score. Arrows that come down or up the screen that you move both your joysticks in the direction of the arrows when they come down over a certain prompt. And circles that close in on balls which demand you press a specific button on the controller. And that's it. That is the entirety of the rhythm sections. And obviously, because 2 of their 3 only mechanics in the section use the same control scheme, they can only use 2 of their mechanics at once during the segments, making it easy since you only have to focus at any point in time on 2 things. Like, was there not any other buttons on the controller that they could map these mechanics to? Like, the triggers, possibly? Like, instead of having the arrows be hit by moving your joysticks down in the direction of the arrows when they come over that prompt, could they not be where once they come down you have to hit your joysticks when they get there, or possibly even the D-pad? It's just bad design having it be configured, multiple mechanics be configured to the same buttons, because it prevents the game from ever getting difficult, because you can never have multiple of those mechanics be done simultaneously. And the worst part about the aforementioned rhythm segment is that they're just completely pointless. Other than getting the Virtuoso achievement from Steam, or just overall the PlayStation Place, or wherever you played on, other than getting achievements, there's no point to play any of these sections in the game as they come up. As a matter of fact, it actually harms you in some cases, as sometimes during the rhythm segments, a montage occurs in the back which displays important plot lines progressing or just casual character stuff, like seeing Trish's sister, or the ending montage of character moments you've never seen in-game before. Actually, to touch on that quickly, these montage moments should not occur during the rhythm segments. Like, granted, where else can you put them? But if you care for the story, but also care to play the only gameplay this game has, you're torn between paying attention to the stuff going on in the background, progressing the story, which is going to make you miss all the stuff that's happening in the rhythm section. You can't divide a player's attention during a rhythm-based game mode, because it will obviously hurt the performance in said game mode. But then again, not that it matters in the end, because your performance in these segments don't matter. You can miss every note or hit every note, and the game continues all the same. At least in A Night in the Woods, a game much simpler with its rhythm segments, the characters comment on your overall performance of the song, even if it's a singular line of dialogue from each character, so it makes it feel like it has impact, that it's recognized and felt by the game. It also helps you feel like you influence the world, a feeling GVH really never gives the player, despite the massive disclaimer at the start warning you that your actions have consequences. However, the issue of the game not caring about the quality of your performance is a factor important to the story, where, as opposed to Night in the Woods, the music segments were done in story as a fun activity to do with friends. Beyond that, it was also serving as a way to establish pacing within the game, but in story, it served just for something your friends to just casually do every now and then, to go ahead and do a garage band. But in GVH, the music segments can be in moments tied to the story where Fang has to perform well enough to win musical competitions, so that the idea a player can miss every note during the Battle of the Bands, an important musical competition that you, the player, play through, and still have the game tell them that they won, is laughable. And that is something you can entirely do in this game. And the best way I can just overall just really describe these rhythm segments is with an old Power Rangers game, with game in quotation marks. Essentially, what it was just a recorded episode of the show, but over all the fight scenes, they had some button or arrow prompts show up during the episode that the player had to hit. But since it was just an episode of the show, hitting or missing the prompts changed nothing, and the episode just kept playing out as it normally would have. If you know what I'm talking about, then congrats. You now know what it's like to play the GVH rhythm segments. Other than that, they do try to shake up the gameplay like twice by having the upcoming minigame segments, where they're more spread out throughout the story, definitely more numerous, much more various, where there's certain like mini games where, for example, you have to necessarily put together a bowl of ramen. You have to choose which like sauce and seasoning you want to put on it. There's another one where you have to go look for around the school for reed, or look around the school for mango, or find your MIDI board, if I said it right, and just overall stuff like that, where it's various, but all of it's monotonous. There's no challenge to really be had, as well. For one, they're all like pretty straightforward. Like there's no challenge in just randomly selecting what type of ramen you're gonna make. I would say the ones that are the most challenging are the ones where you have to look for reed and mango. As for Reed's case, you have to essentially go around the school, using, of course, dialogue prompts to choose where you explore, but go around the school to essentially deduce where Reed is. And for the mango one, it's more of the same, but at the very end, once you essentially find Mango, she jumps out of the trash can, and you have to go ahead and complete a QuickTime event. The variations in the traditional gameplay loop, like watching the movie while changing dialogue and then play a rhythm segment you can completely just ignore, they feel fake. Like, even for the most challenging ones, the minigame where you have to find a reed, 5 minutes before said minigame, they tell you where to find a reed. If you pay attention to the story, which realistically you're going to be doing because all the game is ultimately its story, if you're paying attention, you'll just be able to realistically find him in 10 seconds, as I did my first time playing. And the Finding Mango minigame is pretty similar, except when walking around the school, you just have to talk to still PNGs, which you also have to do for Reed's minigame, but since they literally tell you where to go 5 minutes before, you can completely avoid them. But for Mango's minigame, talk to like a couple NPCs or still PNGs, and it all culminates to having to do a QuickTime event, which doesn't change anything about the story. All it ends up changing is that when you go tell Trish you found Mango, whether or not you send them a picture of you with Mango splatted in slime or not. For the most part, this is the complete extent of the gameplay the game gives you, and it's very underwhelming. For the most part, this is the complete extent of the gameplay the game gives you, and it's very underwhelming. Because at the end of it all, of every minigame, it's very short, very straightforward. Like searching for your mini board, you just click on stuff so you eventually find it. There's no challenge to it. There's no effort to really put into any of these minigames. And ultimately, they serve no greater purpose in the story. They don't affect it at all. It just feels like padding, just pointless padding. As cruel as that sounds, really no point. Sure, it helps diversify the gameplay, but to what ends? If it's just like, for 5 seconds, you just have to go and click on a bunch of items until you essentially click on a MIDI board. It's not very rewarding, but hopefully other aspects, like the game's story, characters, and themes, can prove to be much more entertaining and rewarding. And speaking of that story, might as well get into it now. I'm going to take this chapter by chapter, just giving a brief overview of the story, not going too much in depth. But chapter 1, basic beginner stuff. You introduce to your main characters. There's a hook where it goes ahead and puts you later on in the later events of the story, the campfire scene where you're deciding whether or not to burn a yearbook. And you see the entire cast saying whether or not they should or shouldn't, with you ultimately given the decision where not to burn the book. And afterwards, you're thrown into your first written segment, which introduces you to the gameplay fine enough. Well, yeah, essentially in chapter 1, you're introduced to your cast of characters. Fang, Trish, Nacer, getting to understand all of them in the setting they find themselves in. And especially, there's a lot of emphasis put into learning about Fang's goals and dreams. Where in that one scene in which they go to their first class of the school year, um, Fang discusses how they put heavy emphasis on wanting to go ahead and essentially make a living off of their band, doing the band with their friends and touring, and hopefully that by doing a specific event called Caldera Fest, by winning the Battle of the Bands, that they will be able to do by winning tryouts for the Battle of the Bands, but by doing that, they will be able to accomplish their dreams. And in this chapter, the asteroid is also first introduced. The impending doom of the story is first set up, and where the chapter ends with the asteroid essentially calling a power outage. And now in chapter 2, this is where we start setting up the big dominoes, like Fang's conflict with Trish in terms of getting the band, where Fang wants it to be successful, but Trish just wants to have fun with it, as opposed to the next plot domino, where it sets up Fang's disconnect and just overall shaky relationship with their parents, who don't exactly get and respect their identity. Also, plot dominoes of Fang's secret admirer, who texts them as soon as the first power outage hit from the asteroid at the end of chapter 1. And that's sort of put on the back burner. But regardless, essentially, the plot dominoes of Fang's relationship with their family, Fang's relationship with the band, and especially Trish, the conflict between them two and the directions they want to take the band, and the conflict with, or not conflict, but setting up the domino of Fang possessing a secret admirer. And by the end of the chapter, the Battle of the Bands, or the audition for the Battle of the Bands, begins, wherein, you could play or not play the rhythm segment as you please, but eventually, at the end of it, once you complete it, you pass the audition and make it to actually be able to attend the Battle of the Bands. And also, needless to say, there are plenty of mini games also in this section, like making the photo, finding Reed, following chapter 3. Now, with Fang much more excited about their upcoming Battle of the Bands, they begin to advertise their band, trying to advertise it within the school by where there's a mini game where you design a worm drama poster. One of the very few, I think there's like 2-3 mini games that actually end up influencing later events in the story, and not influencing later events. That's misleading. I mean it in a way where the first one in chapter 1, you get to design the logo of your band. And this is an impactful minigame because it becomes the recurring logo of your band for the entirety of the game. And this poster is one where you actually see it being placed by Fang as they advertise their band throughout the school. And going on with this in chapter 3, Fang continually wants to revise and rework their songs to try to push into a different direction, much to the discomfort and resistance from Trish. And this just keeps highlighting Fang's disconnect of what they want and what the band wants, and by the band I mean Trish, where the discontent is escalated as more incidents occur from what is shown in the story of Fang wanting to go ahead and pursue more practice with the band to try to write themselves, to learn the songs quickly that they're changing up so fast in order to get themselves into that new direction, but it's being constantly frustrated by the other band members, both Reed and Trish in this instance, necessarily not making the time Fang would like them to make to properly master the material. Which, leads into the whole Mango minigame, where because Trish lost Mango, Fang has to go ahead and find them for her, and because of it, they completely miss out on completing band practice. which just helps stack up this domino. And also, this is where we're introduced to the first of 3 L&L segments. L&L just being a off-brand D&D, or a parody of D&D, that Reed roped Fang into. I have a lot to say about the L&L segments, and I'll say it at the end, but just to summarize what happens in this one. An L&L segment happens in which Trish slyly and passive-aggressively disrespects Fang by accusing them of essentially just doing what they've been doing with the band, changing its direction, all of that, solely for the sake of selling out for money and clout to gain LJ's approval. Wherein that sentiment by Trish is never addressed. And instead, Reed just orchestrates a moment in the D&D campaign where Fang and Trish have to work together. And because of that, Trish no longer has any concern about Fang being a sellout. I will come back to this, I assure you. Halfway through the story, anxiety over the asteroid builds, where now it's becoming more and more common within the story that people are constantly giving the odds of the asteroid hitting them, this, that, the third. And characters, especially Reed, not honestly, it's realistically only Reed who's shown to have any anxiety about the asteroid. Where you reflect over the asteroid and what happens, but passively, not passively, but as if it's still a far off thing. Well, Reed is much more fearmongery about it. And we also cut to the next L&L segment. However, in this one, right before the L&L segment begins, Trish, after coming to understand herself that she has a big passion for bugs and would like to pursue that as a career as an entomologist, says that she wants to leave the band to pursue entomology, that over the summer, that she doesn't want to exactly leave the band, but that over the summer she wants to go to college for entomology. That's something she plans to do in the future. And she tells this to Fang right before L&L starts. And so, before Fang can respond, or pursue the conversation in any meaningful manner, L&L starts. And you put the story on pause. Yeah, you put that moment exactly on pause. How emotionally turbulent Fang must be, just coming to know that this is going to throw a huge wrench in what Fang plans to be their future. All of that, no, and they just have a nice little game of L&L. Again, you get to choose how the story goes, branching paths, yada yada. Beyond that, yeah, just L&L. Just L&L. Just put everything about the story on pause. Just, yeah, L&L. Where afterwards, Fang reasonably, instantly remembers, oh yeah, real life exists. And tries to rush to Trish to go talk about it. But the second Fang tries going to them, Trish's like, I'm walking home with Sage. Bye. And just instantly leaves. And also, in a following montage, which shows the characters, essentially just reacting or just being in their own elements, it's finally revealed that the secret admirer that's been after Fang this entire time was Naomi. Which I have to say, within the story, it really wasn't that much of a twist. After all things considered, Naomi was the only one not in Fang's friend group. There was much more character building moments with Naomi than any other character, except for, let's say, Trish, Reed, and Nacer. And I don't think they're trying to be the coffin of Andrew and Lele here. So I didn't think throughout the game that Nacer was going to be the potential love interest. And so, yeah, when it was Naomi, it's well, who else, realistically? And she was really the only character developed enough to properly fit that role that was outside of Fang's sphere. And in Chapter 5, following that, Fang, once again, is discomforted by the fact that Fang's parents hasn't been home. They haven't been home since the start of the school year. And they've just been gone. I have no idea how exactly long this is in terms of the overall school year, how long this is, like, in terms of pacing. But yeah, Fang's parents have just been gone the entire time, with Fang and Nacer still existing somehow. Uh, Maybe their parents just, like, Uber deliver food to them every night. Something, something. But Fang's parents have been gone for an absurd amount of time, and Fang starts to grow discontent with that, as well as just overall being discontent where in every interaction they have with their parents, they simply don't understand their identity, continue to misgender, and just not properly understand them, not understand what they want as their future, how the band is their thing, and Fang is them, not Fatima. But ultimately, that's still continually being built up, and as well as how Trish has also been acting distant from Fang, where even in the morning afterwards, where Fang, or I assume the morning after all, there's no clear establishment of time in GVH, but sometime after, Fang tries to talk to Trish about what had happened at the LNL game, the whole news of, like, I plan to be away for the summer, but then just completely dodges them, and continually dodges them for the longest time about what exactly they want for the band or what they want to be in the band, how they see the band. Just readable questions Fang would have to ask them overall, which Trish just continually tends to dodge. But that's aside, because upcoming is the Battle of the Bands. And after a rocky start and a cold shoulder at the beginning, or should I say a power outage shoulder, I am a comedic genius. They perform extremely well, despite the fact if you could miss every note, and you do. LJ ends up saying, well, you did some good, some bad, but you won the Battle of the Bands. And you are, as Fang, are extremely overjoyed. You are ecstatic. You have finally made it. Now at Caldera Fest, you and your band will play, and your dream will finally become reality. You have done it. What people have shamed you and discouraged you from doing all your life, saying it more as a pipe dream than reality, you have accomplished it. And only then does Trish say, yeah, I don't want to be a part of the band anymore. Not at all. Fang, reasonably upset with this, goes, what? Why? What? And then Trish, of course, retorts, well, I don't want to just, I want to do my own thing. I don't want to necessarily be in the band. I want to be an entomologist. I want to pursue that. I want to do what makes me happy. And to be fair, Trish is right in this. You know, it's not that she owes Fang her entire future, simply for the sake of satiating her desire to be in a band or to be band famous, but they end up having a fallout, and overall, they just Trish storms out, and Fang has other things to do. As Naomi, still anonymous at this point in time, has essentially offered to reveal herself, reveal her identity at the Battle of the Bands. And so, Fang, eager to go out and see who it is, goes out and finds Naomi, which they instantly reject. Yeah, the only options you're given here is just reject Naomi or reject Naomi. So you end up rejecting Naomi, where Naomi still fine with it because it is, a rough time for Fang, all things considered, which Fang does tell them, if not in exact detail. And Naomi understands and says, it's okay, I've waited this long, I don't mind waiting a little bit longer. And just as Fang and Nacer are ready to head home, Aurora Borealis, localized entirely within Volcadera Bluffs. Instantly following this, it cues to a montage of the, essentially showing what has happened following the Aurora Borealis, where it is widely believed, or not, it is shown how school's canceled, everyone believes the end is near. However, some people still manage to go to school, like Naomi, for instance, and Fang and Naomi are no longer on good terms because despite how Naomi was still genuinely warm despite being rejected by Fang, saying like, okay, I get it, you need your time, and, I'll still wait for you. Naomi is now upset with Fang and refuses to talk with them. I it it doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense now, does it? Um, where in one scene it's like portrayed to be a certain way, where Naomi has no ill will, no hard feelings, but then the very next thing we're shown, Naomi is now mad at Fang, going against what they said, with no proper explanation of why Naomi just did a complete coin toss of her feelings towards Fang. And overall, that happens, and you get another moment with LJ where you're talking after the Battle of the Bands, and you're essentially venting to her, saying, "Okay, hey, yeah, I don't know what to do since Trish left. What should I do with the band?" Where LJ goes and responds, "Well, I've been in this business long enough to know there's nothing in it without friends. Where there's no point in doing the music if you're not doing it with your friends to like keep you grounded, or something along those lines." I will get to this later. I will get to this later, but I do have a massive issue with that. But beyond that, it then cuts to a moment where Fang and Reed are talking, lamenting about what's been, how the French group is essentially torn up after Trish and Fang fell out, and how Naomi and Fang fell out, and how Stella, Rosa, and Sage have just simply ceased to exist for some reason. And they conclude that something needs to be done to remedy this. Their solution? The final game of L&L, where over the course of a school year, this group is meant to essentially complete only 3 sessions of D&D. God, their availability must be horrible. But once again, this one's slightly now tied in to the story, but only in theme. And I'll get to the whole discussing the LNL segments later, but essentially the last section of LOL happens. And yeah, that's chapter 6. And here's where we start reaching our climax. Chapter 7, we're following the events of the LNL game. Fang is just being by their lonesome, trying to sing a song to remedy the friendship, the friend group between everyone, despite the fact they just literally all got together for an LNL game, so you would think they'd be on good terms. Which they are, but you'd think that they would, resolved it what they were all together. Or Fang is there at the beach, trying to sing a song, and they send out a text, essentially asking if anyone's available to come to the beach. Where, despite them being in the middle of the apocalypse, everyone is simultaneously available at the exact same moment, and go to the beach to have a bonfire and just a chill hangout session with Fang and the gang. And they essentially say, like, look, I'm sorry for how everything has been, but in the face of certain asteroid annihilation, I'm glad I could be by my friends during this. And they all cheer and continue having fun into the night, wherein, eventually, Fang gets a text on their phone. Essentially from LJ saying how Caldera Fest is cancelled. With all the strife going on, they don't find it safe to host the event, and that they plan to board up and weather this whole thing out. And so after Caldera Fest being cancelled, Fang, naturally, is upset by this, but in the face of certain asteroid annihilation, is just glad that they could be by their friends even now. Naomi, on the other hand, does not feel this same sentiment. And they go off and get very upset, where they just don't understand why is everyone just so accepting of all their futures, everything that they've hoped for, they've dreamed for, being ripped out from under them, taken away, and they're just so accepting of it. And they respond saying, well, what else can you do, Naomi? And Naomi's like, no, this is upset. Like they go like, Naomi, stop being upset. There's nothing we can do. There's nothing you can do. But Naomi continually gets upset. The conversation, the argument escalates, where she goes on to say, like, how can you guys just not just be so dismissive of your futures, everything you lived for, you worked for? Trish goes ahead and replies, well, I, value my friends more than I do my future. I'm glad I can be here with them. And Fang, finding that extremely hilarious, following how, pretty much, like, tore their friendship asunder by leaving the band. And that didn't necessarily stop them from, like, going off to be an entomologist. And Trish is like, bruh. And, of course, conversation explodes, argument ensues, and now everyone's upset. And here, you finally get to the moment in the game where choices have actual impact on the story. Like, not just like an impact where it unlocks an extra scene in the game, but no, it impacts the story. Where, depending on how high you've raised the affinity of certain characters from the game, you get to talk to certain characters and share a heart to heart with them before ultimately talking to the final two characters that you will always be able to talk to, no matter the affinity level, that being Trish and Naomi, where when you talk with Naomi, you get the chance to go ahead and decide whether or not you want to date them. You can choose yes or no, and it doesn't really have that much of an impact. I'll get into that, but it's finally something about the game, about the story, is decided and put into stone based off what you chose. And so, after bringing everyone back together and making peace with it all, you all resolve amongst yourself to put Caldera Fest back on, just doing it by yourselves. And you come together, you devise a way to do it, and you go ahead and do it. And here we are at the final chapter, wherein there are 3 big moments. Immediately after the bonfire scene, you get the option to spend a day with Naomi, where you can choose to refuse it, but I don't know what happens if you refuse it, or don't want to, play the game again to know, for reasons I'll get into later. But essentially, depending on whether or not you chose to date Naomi or not, you can spend a day with Naomi, which either, if you were dating her, will be an actual date on the beach, or if you decide to still be friends, to just watch movies with you, Naomi, and Nasir. Which you also choosing which movie you choose, but then again, no big impact on the story. And then the day after, you go ahead and just come downstairs to hear from Nasir that because of the asteroid, because of debris falling out of the sky, your parents cannot come back home. They can't fly back home. They're stuck wherever it is they are in the world. It's never said. But Fang is completely distraught by this. And so they, after first confiding in Naomi about this, who was at their house, which I find kind of funny because it makes sense for Naomi to be at your house, because in the one where you're not dating Naomi, if you spend the day with them, they spend the night over. It's just a sleepover. But if you date them, the date's completely outside. So the fact that it's implied that after a date, Naomi just came to stay the night is pretty funny. But I'll get into that later. But essentially, yeah, their parents can't come home, and Fang is, despite everything, how, they just previous issues of their parents not understanding their identity and not really respecting what they want to do with life, and just grappling that amongst knowing that you may never see them again. Fang goes ahead and just like throws like a little like party with Trish and Reed. They do it to try to cheer them up, but I mean tonally. I mean like tonally in this game, I'll get into this much more later, but tonally in this game to have a moment where it's like, hey, I may never see my father or mother again, and they're like, oh, yo, that's crazy. You want to like shoot some fireworks, and just instantly cuts to a montage of them having fun. It's I'm gonna get to that. But essentially, then it cuts to the day it all begins, Caldera Fest, where Fang gears up and talks to each one of their friends before going in and stepping on that stage. and playing to what could be hundreds of people on that um, school rooftop, which I forgot to mention. But yeah, they're doing Caldera Fest on top of the school because Nacer has the keys to the school because he is, student president, and so yeah, he can just use the school for stuff like this at any point in time, for some reason legally, and he not face not Nacer, but Fang goes ahead and they play and perform Caldera Fest, and this camera pans up, and the game ends. And that, for the most part, with minor things I've just skimmed over, is the story of Goodbye Volcano High. First thing I want to get into is the characters. Um, Starting off with Fang, the big one. Fang is a complex character. Ultimately, they're the main character, but they're not complex. They're complex in the way the story handles them. Where there are multiple moments in the story where Fang is made out to be does some pretty bad stuff, but the game never portrays it as bad. An example of this is going back. Remember how I had discussed where Fang had started putting up posters of the band Word Drama for the Battle of the Bands to try to advertise it to the school? Well, in that chapter, Nacer argues with them as soon as they get home because he had to spend the entire day ripping down all those posters. Fang, understandably upset, goes like, "Why'd you do that?" And then Nacer goes on to elaborate, "Oh yeah, because it's illegal. Lava Java, the place where Battle of the Bands is being held, serves alcohol at a certain point in time. Therefore, you cannot advertise it to minors as they are currently in high school." Fang, other than reasonably apologizing and understanding, hey, yeah, there was a oversight on my fault and I shouldn't have ignored you for that, or like not read your text and done something about that sooner, or known about it at all, or just apologizing for not knowing in general, or just showing anything to show the slightest bit of remorse, instantly throws it back onto Nacer by saying, "Why aren't you being supportive of the band? This is my future. This is something I want to be my future." When no, no, that's not what this is. You are doing something illegal. You, and it's not just that. They just afterwards they didn't try to flip it on Nacer. It's like, "You're just mad at me because you have nothing you want to do with your life." And Nacer's like, "Yeah, you're right." And actually, Fang managed to gaslight Nacer in this moment that it is their fault for not holding Fang accountable for doing something which is literally illegal, which can get both of them into trouble, which could jeopardize Fang's entire future getting expelled from school because they did something illegal, and also drag Nacer down with her. I thought it would sure come to that extent, but still, the fact that no remorse is shown about this, and they actually managed to flip it onto Nacer, making them seem like they're the problem, it doesn't paint Fang in the light these writers want to portray them in. It portrays them as a pretty bad person. And overall, of course, there's a bunch of other stuff they do in the game, which is like better and stuff like that. We're not like a bad person, but still, I feel like there are some serious issues with the writing, especially when it comes to the characters and the portrayal of the morality of certain characters' actions. Because if you were to take into account how Fang is throughout the story, it's easy to come away with that they've done some really bad stuff that they have never truly apologized or taken account for. And on top of that, the story consistently through Fang bullies Nacer for calling out Fang and pulling out all the posters, despite the fact it's literally illegal. Calling him a narc and shaming him for that continually throughout the story. Keep in mind, Nacer's only gripe was that what they were doing was quite literally illegal. Nacer, following that, had always been supportive of the band, had shown no sign of envy or just straight up disapproval of Fang with their career choice being the band. But because Nacer is calling them out for, you know, doing something illegal that could get them both in trouble, Nacer's the one with the problem. And that's how the story continually portrays Nacer. Overall, I feel like Fang is an alright character, and a pretty blank slatey. But overall, it's the character that the player is supposed to put themselves on. It's supposed to feel like a blank slate because it's a choice-driven game where if you decide Fang's actions in certain ways, it has to be a blank slate enough where players can impose themselves onto them enough to essentially get involved in interested in the story or immersed. Trish. I have some problems with Trish, and these problems mainly tie back to how she is portrayed at the end. Where by the end of the game, Fang apologizes to Trish for how they've been a bad friend, for essentially not being supportive of her and her career of an entomologist. But no, no, that's Trish is not the hapless victim here. And on the same coin, neither is Fang, but the way that in the story, Trish is essentially portrayed as this victim, where all they want to do is pursue their own passions, while the game just simultaneously forgets the fact that they were constantly dodging Fang when they just dropped, hey, yeah, I don't want to, I'm not going to be in the band for the summer, I'm going to be in, like, college, and just continually, like, hiding from them that they had no intention of just continuing to be in the band, but instead at first saying, well, at first, uh, I'm just not going to be around in the summer. No, when in reality, Trish just had no intention of continuing with the band at all, which is pretty bad considering that these characters are best friends, and knowing how loud and proud Fang is about how they view their career in the band and music to be their future, and knowing how the band is their future with Trish in the band, hiding the fact that the Trish does not want to continue being in the band is something that is ultimately going to upset Fang, and the fact that they continually hide from it does not paint her as a hapless victim. Continuing on, the fact where she waits until the very moment where they win the Battle of the Bands to then tell them, I do not want to continue to be in the band, it's completely reasonable, Fang's reaction. Like, in a sense, where, the discomfort, the discontent between them comes from. I get it. But then to have it be put all on Fang as the one to apologize, as the one as if they're the bad guy. Then again, it's also said throughout the story that Fang to an extent knew, but just didn't want to believe it. Where they had, like, hindsight of this, there is enough fault still within Trish for not just coming out and blatantly telling them, for continuing to dodge Fang. And there's multiple points where literally like bro, where Trish at the part where you go talk to her in chapter 7 at the big bonfire scene goes like, bro, why didn't you just tell me about this sooner? Why didn't you talk about this sooner? Just be straight up with me. When in the game, Trish has been shown to do the exact opposite herself. Need I reference back to the first L&L session wherein Fang gets passively aggressively referred to as a musical sellout by Trish in an L&L game, showing her to be extremely petty and passive aggressive, while also, not confronting the issue, the same thing she is accusing Fang of doing. And Trish is like, the game wants you to like her, and she isn't necessarily a bad character, especially in like the golden ending for Trish, where you max out affinity for her. Only in that ending does Trish apologize, and properly apologize, for what she did. But the way the game makes you want to like her, with how they portray her as this, like, just anguished being, when in reality her actions do not properly reflect that, or at least the actions that are shown of her in the story. And Naomi, as a character, she is largely irrelevant to the story. Like, the main story revolves around Fang and their friends and the Battle of the Bands, where the band, she essentially views the band as her future. Where Naomi and the Secret Admirer is essentially not even a B plot, because it doesn't contribute at all to the A plot, only in like sparse cases where she gives them inspiration for songs. It's only shown once, and even then, ham-fisted in, where the story really didn't need that section, that scene, or that moment of inspiration, in order for it to continue on. You could remove that scene of Naomi inspiring Fang to like think up a song, and the story would still continue largely the same without any plot. You could remove most of the moments with Naomi, and the story would continue on largely the same, with the exception of the MIDI scene. But then again, the reason the MIDI scene exists is because the plot needed a reason to bring Fang and Naomi together, beyond the whole secret admirer thing, just naturally in the course of the plot, where, hey, Naomi's in, like, the robotics club. Maybe she knows how to fix a MIDI controller that's been tainted by nail polish, because that's how robotics clubs work. But even then, I feel like Naomi, she needed to have a much more active role in the story for the amount of time given to her to be justified. Like, the whole secret admirer thing, it's a subplot, sure. It adds more, like, depth to the story, but if anything, I feel like in some places it takes away from the story, because needless to say, I'm gonna get into this later, but there is a lot of parts of the story and plot lines that are simply undercooked, rushed, and improperly paced, which I blame the fault of that being put on time or pacing not properly allocated within the story, where, going back to the L&L segments as the biggest culprit, where a good chunk of 3 chapters are dedicated to just a D&D game that has little to no relation to the story at large. And as we'll get into the bigger plot holes later on, the game needed to just properly allocate its pacing and its time in the story, its development of certain things. So if they don't properly weave it into the story to make it all flow naturally and seamlessly with one another, it just feels like, okay, we're pausing the whole band plot line to go focus on the, hey, yeah, Fang got a secret admirer. Oh, it's Naomi. Ooh. It's like, it doesn't really contribute. It doesn't really affect anything. It doesn't build up or try to, like, add on to anything. And I can elaborate on that later. But overall, Naomi just feels irrelevant with how they were used in the story. And now with Reed. Reed is meant to be this big, necessarily bridging character between Fang and Trish, the thing that constantly keeps them glued together. A big intermediary, like some kind of savant who really helps, or I wouldn't say a savant, but he's essentially the glue of the friend group. However, Reed is also a big vessel. He's used to help, remind people that, there's an asteroid coming to the Earth, with how much he fearmongers about it, which kind of goes against his character. Being like, the chill, laid-back, stoner dude. Which, actually, no, it does make sense, because he would use the meteor to justify, nothing matters. But then again, why would he care and constantly, fearmonger and look into the meteor, or news about the meteor, if nothing mattered? Either way, that's an argument for another time. Frankly, I don't want to hump up too much on that point, because this feels more so like personal opinion than anything really objective. But there are multiple points in the story where Reed acts like he's putting the two together, or doing stuff to bridge them. Like, going back, the first L&L segment, where he says, like, look, I know the perfect way to get you and Trish back together, or back talking in much better terms. The way he does this is by having their D&D characters work together to solve a puzzle. Realistically, that would not instantly resolve Trish's fears about Fang being a sellout, but because the story demands it to be, instantly that plot issue is never brought up again, where Trish no longer believes Fang to be a sellout because they work together to solve a puzzle in D&D. And coming back to the D&D segment, one thing I actually have to say is that because it's the branching path type stuff, you could choose a path in that game. There could be a moment in which Fang and Trish don't work together, but the game still acts as if you had. It's if you choose the path of essentially the one where you go into the Crystal Caverns, I believe. And it's just continuity issues and consistency issues like that. There's much more of them, but just for this section, where, yeah, that happens, and then for some magic reason, Trish is now suddenly super okay with Fang, and Reed's like, you're welcome, despite the fact he realistically did nothing to help resolve that, and that should not have been resolved. at all between those two. But Reed is not a bad character, not a bad character, but the game constantly portrays him, or the story more aptly, the story portrays him a bit bigger than he's made out to be. Nacer, as I talked about before, with how Fang is that one scene where Fang essentially bullies Nacer continually throughout the story for telling them, hey, why'd you do something illegal that could get us both in trouble? Nacer feels like he's used to help bridge Fang between them and the whole like family plot line. The one where the massive discontent with their family, and overall just constantly like use. I feel like it's more so as the butt of the story, where especially in that moment where I feel like that was just needless conflict that realistically shouldn't have happened. And as a character, Nacer is just there's a lot to be done with Nacer. There's so much. Where yeah, Nacer is just criminally like misrepresented within the story. And I feel like there's a lot more that realistically could have been done with him that I'll get into later when I go in and discuss the themes of the game. But overall, I feel like he was done dirty. He was done so dirty. Sage, done even dirtier. Sage is one of those tertiary, like, or secondary, technically, but realistically, Sage, Stella, and Rosa are a group of side characters that are relegated more to, like, just not really being there in the story. We don't really know much about Sage's character. Sage doesn't even, speaking of that, Sage doesn't really even have a character. Every time Sage is on screen, well, almost every time Sage is on screen, their entire gimmick is that they like cooking. Well, even going back to that, I feel like something else, the writers, especially when it comes to writing the characters of Yubavik and how I struggled with, is that most of these characters exceptionally feel one note. Nacer, for instance, it feels like his character revolves around him being student president. Reed's character revolves around liking L&L. Sage's character revolves around his love for cooking. Trish's character revolves around Trish and Fang, much more complex characters. Naomi, I think Naomi's I feel like Trish, Fang, and Naomi, good characters. They're not just one beat. Reed, Nacer, Sage, Stella, and Rosa exceptionally feel one beat. And I feel like that's something the writers of GVH struggled with, because it gets really annoying when you see a character and like, hey, this character likes cooking. Okay, that's a character trait of theirs. But if it's the only thing they talk about and reference and allude back to, as if it's their entire personality, it does get annoying. Where I feel like Sage and his love for cooking, as admirable as it is brought up just too much in reference to him and his character just passively, that it does start to wear. However, there is one scene in the story, my favorite scene in the story, that makes me believe Sage could have been so much more than what he was mainly portrayed to be. And that being the scene where, in Chapter 4, I believe it correctly, if I remember correctly, in Chapter 4, you have, if you choose the right dialogue option in a scene before, you get an extra scene with Sage, wherein they discuss the struggles with affirming their gender identity with their family. And I feel like that helped tie back into, that could have possibly explained why they're so adamant on them cooking, why they feel so incessant on bringing it up, because they feel it could tie back to their need to affirm themselves and their identities, and their identity to their parents, which might have brought themselves out to just people around them. Where maybe why they pursue cooking so much is in the same way of why they feel disgruntled by how their parents simply don't expect anything of them anymore. Where now, as he said, there's no pressure to be femme because his family doesn't expect it of him anymore, and he feels like overall his family just gave up on him or expecting anything from him. So being a cook, affirming that to himself, affirming that he wants to be great with it, could tie back excellently towards that and turn something that could have been like a problem that I disliked about the character into a nice little feature that I feel like would have been so amazing. Problem is that is about the only depth Sage gets in the entire story. and and that is painful. I think so much more could have been done with Sage, and it just isn't, and it hurts. It really does hurt. And with the final few, Stella, going back again, one beat character, tarot cards. They try to do more with her, but like she's very like supportive. She's like a friend, but there's not much to her essentially. She doesn't contribute much to the story. Um, if you were to remove Stella from the story, all that remove is just the tarot card segments, which realistically wasn't needed and does not impact the story in any way in the first place. Yeah. So yeah, just like meh, kind of forgettable. And Rosa is. I feel like Rosa is the worst handled main character because Rosa, I, has no personality. Realistically, they have no personality, and that sucks. Yeah, it really does suck. Where everything about them just screams they are the friend. Where there's nothing really about them that stands out. They don't stick out in any way. They don't even contribute to the story that much. Like sure, there's like a plot point around, but not even around them. It just helped to signify Fang's growing discontent with Trish or growing distance with Trish. Where Rosa still wants to be the friend and be cool with them, but for some reason I feel like the problem is for a lot of these side characters you never really get to see them explored. Like even despite all the side scenes, you don't see any exploration of who these characters are, what they want. Like that one scene with Sage was enough to make me completely turn my opinion on him. And Stella and Rosa, they don't get that scene, and I feel like that does hurt them in terms as characters because there's not much there for them. And the extras being like all the extra characters like Miss Roberts, um, LJ, Swamp Babies, all those extra background characters, they're just filler. Not much there. There's nothing beyond the main cast. It doesn't like all the other characters don't feel impactful. Well, naturally, of course, they're not explored at all. But no, I mean it in a way where it does make the world feel wider. There's multiple points in the story. One of the mini games is how there are two seconds where you can do this. You are just shown a wide screen of people, and you can hover your cursor over each and every one and learn a little bit about them. What does that contribute to? What does that amount to? Nothing. Nothing. It's supposed to be world building, but if anything, it serves no. It feels more so like filler, where it's like, hey, this person loves gaming. You will never talk to, interact, or see this person ever again. It's just like, why? Why waste time fleshing out characters that will not ever be referenced or looked to in the story at all? It's once again, I feel like a lot of gripes I have with this is I feel like they put too much attention in the wrong places, and it just brings out moments like this where there's just stuff that are there but they serve no real purpose. No matter how you break it down, it's just the game would be completely fine were they not there. They don't add anything, don't contribute much, if anything at all, and it just um, disturbs me. And going on from the characters, next up is the characters' designs. And one gripe I do have with the character designs, it just over the course of the game, the character designs, other than like some few exceptions, just aren't expressive enough. An example of this I'd like to point out to help illustrate my point is that in the first chapter, there's a moment where Naomi accidentally essentially touches a sore topic, asking Fang what they planned their career to be, but then realizing how, like, essentially touchy that subject is, how it might be putting them in a position that makes them look bad. They feel bad and instantly try to retract what they were saying, where they feel guilty. They sound guilty. The character direction, the voice actor in the direction, sounds guilty, but the face of Naomi, as the character is saying that, does not express that at all. It doesn't show any guilt, remorse, abrupt realization. It just shows them looking in the general direction of Fang. And I feel like that is something that happens more often than it should, if at all. And it really pulls me out of the design of the characters, where I feel like they fit this setting much better if they were just more expressive, if they could probably fit what they were saying at times. And in the same way where you really don't see the Simpsons face front a lot because the Simpsons were designed with them not to be front facing in mind. Over the course of the story, literally in the first 10 seconds of the game, you get to see a front view of Fang, and it is not pretty by any stretch. It's just simply not a position, a pose, a view that the character was designed for. But because of how unwilling the devs are to hide from, showing the characters in such views, it's it's something you see more often than you should. I feel like they should have not shown the character from that angle, and it just really pulls you out the design when you just see a front facing pterodactyl. It's simply something you really ought to avoid, and the designers should have. Good God, I understand. Maybe for one thing, it just had to be there for a split second, but literally in the first 10 minutes into the game, we just I feel like something should have been done around that. And going back, also background filler, where I feel like the character's design essentially ties back to, and also going back to a similar point I shared with another one of my topics. The character's design, just overall, the main characters, I feel like they stand out enough, but the overall characters for everyone in the setting, it feels they all start to blend in with one another, where because so many of them try to stand out and none of them do, with the exception of all the main characters. I would say the character design is done well enough. The characters, silhouette rule, vastly differ from one another. I like the designs mostly. I feel like Naomi's design especially is really well done. Um, Fang, I feel like the forehead. They really should know something about that forehead. Most of the character designs aren't bad, but it feels like it gets so samey after a while, where it just really takes you out of it. Once again, going back to the background filler. This seems like a small thing, but there is a surprising amount of things that can be pulled away from what is in a game's pause menu. The menu had a couple things in it: a method of telling your affinity with other characters in the story, a place to view any flashback unlocked in the story, a Twitter section known as Feather, a place to view photos, the photo gallery, that are unlocked over the course of the story, and settings. I'll go over each and every one, except settings, as, that's self-explanatory. Settings was fine. It was settings of all time. But to start off with the affinity meter, this is something I actually like. If anything, it's one of the only things I felt was done right in the settings. I like its overall design and UI, as it's fitting the theme of the game by having the affinity meter be conveyed through planets orbiting Fang, each with their own varied size and orbit, telling the player how high affinity is. Also like the little chibi designs for the characters, but that's a personal preference if anything. On the other side to the affinity meter, however, are the flashbacks. You unlock flashbacks passively throughout the game, with you always unlocking all the flashbacks by the time the game ends. Well, as from what I've always seen. And there are always a total of 6 flashbacks, each detailing an out-of-story moment. I'd give a long ramble about this coming up, but just to give the short of it, in concept, the flashback system would be great. A great way to provide much needed context for the characters and events in the story, but was fumbled massively. And overall, the game would be exactly the same, and in some aspects, better without it. And for the last two notable menu items, being the place to view any photos and the Twitter section, where the Twitter section is simple. It's a feed where you get to see people of the people of Volcano Bluffs talk and chat about their lives and stuff. It is 99% of the time used for jokes. The entire branch of the menu is criminally misused. Something that could have been used for world building, contextualization, both the story and the characters, literally anything other than jokes. This doesn't even deserve to be a menu feature. It's not even that I don't like it. The jokes aren't bad. Some made me chuckle. I'm just saying, but why in the world would development time be wasted on something not needed in the game when glaring bugs, issues that I had on launch, combined with the lackluster gameplay and, well, story and a bunch of other stuff, need much more attention, but they dedicate time to just a little, joke bar of the menu, which I feel like could have absolutely been used to much greater effect. maybe a way where the player can learn more about the apocalypse, which that is another thing I will have to get into later. But it could have been used to, help, like, let us see some of the side like Stella, Sage, and Rosa, like having seeing what they post on their Twitter, what they do in their off time, what they go through. Let us know more about these characters, help flesh them out. Same thing for Fang and Naomi, or not Fang, well, we are Fang, but like Naomi and Trish, just anything. I mean, hell, even to both expand on the story while also expanding on the characters. Like maybe having a moment where we see on the Feather Reed sharing an article, essentially fear mongering about the asteroid, and that way we get to learn a little bit about the asteroid and reinforce Reed's existentialist dread over it. Just something along those something absolutely could have been done to advance the story in the places where the story itself couldn't do, but it just doesn't. And of course, the photo gallery. It's pretty simple. As you hit certain checkpoints during the game, and depending on the dialogue choices you make, you unlock certain moments in the game where after those moments are done, you get a photo in the gallery to encapsulate the moment. Problem with this is that the quality of the photos you unlock varies drastically. A few, like the photo you get when you agree to do the date with Naomi, are extremely high quality. But for most, like the photo you get after talking to Sage in the middle of the game where he vents to you about affirming his identity with his parents, looks horrible. That and funny thing, you would think with a system like this, the pictures you would save for each subsequent playthrough, so it'd stick around to help, establish a sense of progression and allow something like add to replayability, so that you can like essentially like complete and only get every photo from the photo gallery. No, it resets for each playthrough, so you can never collect or see all the photos at any one point in time. To reference this new game, they did this better, where whenever you would see or unlock a certain photo, it would stay there permanently. So you can look back to it to see your sense of progression, to see your sense of completionism of the overall game. Granted, you could just say that was a feature baked into the Renpy engine, but still, it was a feature that they kept in line with and, did something for. And it felt nice. And it just doesn't make sense. If you're going to have a feature like that, why not have it save across playthroughs? Why have it reset after each one? It could be such a nice tool to establish progression, so that when you replay the game and do different paths, you can go look back to like, I remember that one move thing, or I'm getting so close to completing one. No, it's just gone. It doesn't make. I can't think of any reason why it should have been that way, why it is this way. And here is an example, as I was saying before, with how the quality, where on the left you can absolutely see the effort, the attention to detail, just how great that drawing is. I think that's a drawing. And then you look to the right, where it's just the characters' models like put in a certain position. Like, like, come on, just look at them. Just look at them. Look me in the eyes and say, like, what happened? Did they run out of budget midway through the photos? Like, they only drew like two really high quality photos. Like, oh god, bro, we're broke. Quick, let's go ahead and just take the models and slap them on like a backboard. I don't get why it's this. Why not have it just be uniform? It's still drawing me to see like something so high quality and didn't have it be juxtaposed by just the characters' models put next to one another. And this menu item, the flashbacks. There are 6 flashbacks comprising of just Nacer telling Fang a bunch of corny jokes, Stella introducing Sage to Fang, Trish, and Reed, Sage and Rosa on the roof of the school venting about stuff, Naomi having trouble giving a speech and just overall troubles with public speaking, Fang and Trish deciding on the name of the band, and Fang and Trish learning about Reed's crush. And going about this in order, my thoughts on Nacer and Fang jokes is it's pretty pointless. Other than telling a couple of jokes, it serves no greater purpose in contextualizing the story or expanding the player's understanding of their relationship or dynamic. It serves no harm, but it serves no good. And for Stella introducing Sage, this one at least adds a bit of contextualizing of how Sage met the group, but still it serves no purpose in the end. It brings no big revelations about how Sage's character or Stella's relationship to them, nor have any relevance to the story or impact. If anything, it feels like it goes against how both Stella and Sage are characterized, because Stella, as we've been shown to see, is a much more reclusive, keep to herself kind of person, as evidenced by, not part of the LNL group. You never really see her hang out with anyone except Sage. You really never see her, like, go out or be, like, out there. When, as opposed to Sage, where Sage is much more bubbly and outgoing. We see this all throughout the story. How is Stella the one introducing Sage to the group? Well, shouldn't it make more sense that Sage would be the one to meet the group first and then bring Stella into it due to how close they are? Based on how this slight contradiction, maybe just me reading the characters differently, but it would make sense that you have the bubbly and outgoing character be the one to, bring the shy and reserved one into friend groups. Maybe if they had more, like, a deeper explanation of this, there'd be something more to attach to or understanding, but it just feels more so like a slight contradiction, just how the character's been established. So I'd say it's slightly underneath the Nacer and Fang jokes in terms of quality. And for Sage and Rosa on Roof, this one stretches the definition of flashback, or I think the game actually calls them memories, but it stretches the definition of it because despite it being a flashback, Fang isn't in this one, it's just Sage and Rosa. So how Fang unlocks a memory that they aren't even in is beyond me. Regardless, in my opinion, this is the worst flashback in the game. Because it directly goes against both characters, the way they've been characterized this entire time. In the flashback, they vent about how hard it is being the person that people always vent to all the time and how much they talk about themselves. They want to talk about themselves and not being a venting board. Issue is, these events they are talking about literally do not exist. Granted, all these flashbacks take place before the events of the story. I think it's before and or during. It's hard to say. There's no timeline ever given in this game, but they take place out of the story. So, in the flashback, they talk about how hard it is being the person they always vent to, or that everyone else always vents to. But in the story, you never see anyone vent to Rosa or Sage even once. Or you never see anyone even allude that someone has vented to Rosa or Sage once. Hell, if anything, the contrary is true, as there are moments in game where Sage vents to Fang. The one moment in particular where they talk about how, hard it is to affirm their identity to their parents. Either way, if anything, the contrary is true. It's just, in-game, once again, what they talk about isn't relevant to their characters or stories in any way and provides no contextualization. It's the worst flashback by far, as it directly goes against it. That definitely goes against how they've been essentially characterized this entire point in the game. So it doesn't resonate or hit at all, because it's them venting about stuff that we have never seen happen, or that we have never seen them been through. And if anything, the opposite is more true than what they tell us these guys are going through. In the Naomi public speaking, this one, Naomi gives a speech to the school and vents about how hard it is stuttering. She feels unsure if her abilities in public speaking are, like, good, and she considers, reclusing from it as a whole, until a student comes up and says that she looks up to the way that Naomi speaks publicly, and Naomi feels reinvigorated to continue public speaking. That's just about it. Thankfully, this one doesn't betray her characterization, but once again, it doesn't contextualize or relate back to the story in any way. It serves no harm, but no good. Rank it a little better than the first one. Nacer and Fang jokes, that being. And naming of the band, this is the best one by far, but that isn't saying much. In this one, Trish and Fang joke about a worm when they were younger, and after saying the fateful name of the band, they talk about starting a band. This one actually possesses the luxury of contextualizing something about the story, that being the name of their band. As little as that is, it's something, as well as providing a view into the foundation of Fang and Trish's relationship before the events of the story. I feel like this is the best one by far. And Reed's crush is, I'd say, the second best flashback, but I'm half debated to lower it on quality, just based on how shoehorned it is to connect it to the story. The memory is just Trish and Fang prying Reed on info about his crush, a man called Alvin, and that's it. And they connected it to the story in the most infuriating way possible. I remember in the gameplay section of my review where I discussed how sometimes there's montages during the rhythm segments. Well, at the very end of the game, when you're playing the last song at Caldera Fest, for a single photo in the endgame montage, you see Reed hanging out with Alvin at prom. If you were, playing the game, you could have missed this. There's a heavy chance you could have missed this. I, for one, know Because that's what happened when I first played it. I completely missed it because I was too busy, actually completing the rhythm segments. And for a game that's all about LGBT themes and how, people pride it for being about that, they sure know how to suppress it. With just how irrelevant and disregarded this entire plot line is, if you can even call it that. But since it technically connects back to the story in the most rudimentary way possible, it serves to be a flashback with a reason to be there. And also another thing to mention that these flashbacks, all of them, have no sounds and aren't even animated like the rest of the game. It's like a comic you click through. Because of how silent it is, it's extremely uncanny to go through these flashback sections. Overall, if I were to rank them in terms of highest quality, lowest quality, I'd say highest quality is naming the band, then Reed's crush, then Naomi public speaking, then Nacer and Fang jokes, Stella introducing Sage, and last but certainly the least, Sage and Rosa on the roof, with only two of these flashbacks having any sort of relevance to the story. Now, when it comes to how this game establishes immersion, um, there are parts where I especially feel they could have done much, much better. Going to the audio design of the game, the audio design is done well. Okay, I have to bring this up now because I feel like if I don't, I never will. One thing we'll give, the music is amazing. The music by Naboo, absolutely phenomenal. I love the music. I listen to that like on my own. I love it that much. But the audio design of the game itself, like the sound effects, are quite lacking. An example I can point to help illustrate this is during the first chapter, when you are put and prompted to essentially do a mini game to come up with the logo of the band. It is in the midst of Miss Roberts, the teacher character, giving a lecture, blah, 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 talking about like futures and all that. And the way it just cuts from her talking to just straight silence of Fang designing the logo is extremely uncanny and jarring. It takes you out of it because it feels so unnatural. I feel like what should have been done instead, for at least that moment, was to go ahead and have her continue talking, but have it be muffled in the background. So that way it still feels like you're in the classroom, but not paying attention, just focusing on something else. Or maybe like while the audio's muffled, you have like a little like passive, smooth track playing in the background. Something. It just so that it like flows into it, so it isn't so jarring. And I feel like there's multiple other points in the story where just the audio design really could use some work. And on top of that, going on to the anthropomorphism. The characters in GVH, they're all dinosaurs, if this has not been made clear at this point. And it doesn't really feel that way. With the exception of two moments in the story, you could replace all these characters with human beings, and you would not be able to tell that these characters were meant to be dinosaurs just based on dialogue alone. If I were to tell you just the dialogue of the game, with the exception of like one line of dialogue, just one, you would not be able to tell that these characters are all dinosaurs. And I feel like that's something that needs to be, like woven into the game, where to make it feel realistic and immersive into the world, to make it just serve a purpose, and so that you could feel that these characters are who they are throughout the story. And it's just that in GVH, it just doesn't seem realistic. The world of GVH doesn't seem realistic for the people who inhabit it. In Snook Game, they wove in a race seamlessly into the world, even having slurs for certain dinosaurs, which is something to discuss. But still, it makes the world feel realistic and more immersive. When you look at the world in Snook Game, you can take away that this is a world dinosaurs realistically inhabit with humans, and it feels like that. You feel it all throughout the story with how the characters talk to one another, how they go off, how they tone. It's there. It's absolutely there. But in GVH, it only references back to the fact everyone's a dinosaur twice. Once being when the teacher, Miss Roberts, makes an offhanded comment about, homework, saying, don't say that your homework's named by your Mastrozana, whatever, dinosaur. That's not an excuse. And another part where Fang flies. Fang can fly. This becomes problematic for reasons I can get into later. But I just feel like that is I disagree with that character with that decision. That if they I disagree with it so much I'm not gonna get into it now. But realistically only 2 moments are you like shown or reminded that hey, these characters are like dinosaurs and like animals, not human beings. And I feel like they should have done a little bit more to help immerse the player into this world that makes it feel realistic, that it's inhabited by dinosaurs, that this is a world that dinosaurs realistically inhabit. And of course, also for anthropomorphism, there's three main reasons why um, anthropomorphism is also put in media in the first place. That being, symbolism, um, themes, or a way to convey things about the character and their story without having to explicitly say so, and also using themes to touch upon societal, the anthropomorphism to touch upon societal issues, and using the like animals as allegories. Um, Also, tonally to just make it to some extent to influence the tone of the story by depending on like how you have your characters be, would be human animals. That does influence tone, and to that extent, I have to go ahead and say like for symbolism, the way it like ties back into Goodbye Volcano High, I feel like it only ties back only to like the whole asteroid hitting the Earth thing. Beyond that, there's really nothing like Fang being a pterodactyl um, doesn't have any change in the story or the themes of the story if Fang were a T-Rex or a raptor. And I just wish more could have been done with how anthropomorphism was handled. Tonally, I'd say it's okay, but symbolically, I just feel like more especially could have been done with this. But as it is, it doesn't really immerse you to the world of how the anthropomorphism was handled in story, at least, because realistically, going back to what I said, you could just be shown only the dialogue of this game, excluding one line, and you realistically would not just as so easily be able to tell that these characters are dinosaurs. And another thing that really takes away from immersion is the lack of player impact. Now, what do you mean by that? You may ask. Well, um, I've equated to like a movie before. One that you can like just occasionally change the words in depending on what you make Fang say in a specific instance. And also how the game gives you a big disclaimer at the start of be careful what you do as your choices have consequences is ironic with how this game, despite how your choices have little to no effect on the story, still manage to have your choices have consequences. The way your choices matter is not by having the actions or words you have Fang say alter the course of the story, but instead, think of how they have player impact like this. You watch a movie, and in that movie, the main character can say something nice to either side character A or side character B. You choose to have them say something nice to side character A, and as a result, you get an extra scene in the movie where the main character talks to side character A. The movie doesn't change, however. Then after that scene is done, it goes back to the main movie it was showing before. That's pretty much how player impact is done in GVH, where in a scene, there may be a moment where you can say something in that moment to a character, and then if you say the right thing, you can then have another scene in the game right after it with that character. Nothing else changes though. And there isn't anything where your choices linger throughout the story, where maybe a choice you made near the start can give you that extra scene near the end of the story. No, it's literally where if you say the right thing in the moment, you get an extra action, an extra scene in the moment. Nothing else. However, these choices typically also affect the affinity system, which does have an effect later down the line, only up until near the end of the game. But all this really affects is just the requirements to get your photos in the photo gallery. And one moment at the end of the game where you have enough affinity with a certain character, you can have a conversation with them. Yes, for that one thing that has long-term effects that leads up to the same thing as the choice of always leads up to. An extra scene where you talk with a character. It doesn't change the story at all either. It just gives you the ability to have that conversation with the character of your choosing at the end. Because of this, it feels like the player had no impact. Technically they do, but it's a meaningless kind of impact. You can control Fang, but you can't control the events of the story at all, despite how much the game deludes you otherwise. It is a set course for the story, and the player cannot alter it at all, only just unlock extra scenes. And going on, to now compare this to other games, Snoop Game. At least that game had ways you could actively influence story events. For example, the rooftop scene. You can cut off Fang and end it early, as well as just end it with a different outcome, as opposed to just if you let them speak. As well as affecting the affinity system, which gives the player lingering consequences for their actions that actually affects the story. Even for just letting their actions impact the course of the current scene, it makes the player more immersed into the story because it's one they can actively control. And when there can be both immediate and long term consequences of how a player goes about interacting with your story, it really does feel like their actions have consequences, so it makes them engaged to make sure their actions bring about the consequences they want, and can feel rewarded when they do. In GVH, the player goes on with the idea that they can actually influence the course of events. I mean, why wouldn't they? The game gives them a big disclaimer saying they could, which the disclaimer is really misleading. Your actions have consequences, but none of the story or characters at all, Lamau. No, those are set in stone. Your consequences will be an extra scene or a photo. But I digress. It makes the player feel incredibly betrayed when they come to understand their choices don't really affect anything that matters in a story-based game. Hell, the choices don't even matter in the game part of the game. As said before in the rhythm segments, you can literally not hit a single note, and due to how railroaded the game is, the story still continues along, acting as if you played good. When a player seeks to interact with a game, and the game doesn't return that interaction with effects cast upon the game, it unimmerses the player from the game because they have no stakes in it. They have nothing to lose because they have nothing to control. And when they have nothing to control, they have nothing to invest themselves into. And another place this game really fails in, which it shouldn't, is its replayability. In this game, another reason why, going as before, where the lack of impact is as bad as it is, even for the parts where you can impact, it's so de-incentivizing to go back and try to make what little impact you can in the game, simply due to how horribly it's designed against the player in terms of replayability. The game only has an autosave feature. There is no save state. There is no way to save at a certain moment where, let's say, hey, I want to go make a different decision, see how this plays out differently. Nope. Only autosaves. And if you want to go ahead and, let's say you actually, get to the end of the game and you, by sheer accident, chose to not date Naomi when you wanted to. Or let's say you were performing one of the band music segments, the rhythm segments, and you just missed the 90% completion mark, and you want to just give it another go. There is no save state. You can't go back. And if you hit a point where it automatically autosaves, the only way to redo that again is to play through the entire game from scratch, from start, to get back to that point. On top of that, another system they add, or that they didn't add more accurately, that really goes to hurt replayability, is that there is no skipping. You cannot skip through dialogue in a way that just breezes through it, or story elements. You can't skip scenes, none of that. You have to sit through everything. You can mash the A button as much as you want, but you're going to have to sit through all the story segments in order to get to any point in the game that you want to replay or go back through. And this actually ties back where, like I said, even if the player wants to replay to experience the full story again, there's still certain elements, certain montages, which if you replay the game, you already know what happens. So there's no reason to see it again. There's no reason to just sit around for 10 minutes watching something you've already seen. So the fact that there isn't a skip feature where you have to sit through it again really hurts replayability. It makes it where this is a 7 to 8 hour game on average. That's how long it took for me to complete it. A 7 to 8 hour game. And if you make a mistake that you want to go back and undo, you could possibly have to play up to 7 to 8 hours to see what it was. I had to play the game twice in order to see that one Alvin section where Alvin and Reed go to prom together. At the very end, I had to play it again for 8 hours in order to hit that section again. Either way, it's just, that shouldn't be a system. And granted, going back, there's not much to replay other than those unlocking those extra moments, those extra scenes, because there's only one ending. The only thing you can actually change about that ending is whether or not you're wearing a purple outfit or a black one. There's no influence on that ending beyond that. So why would you replay just to see the same ending? Is something that ultimately hurts replayability. But here's the thing. All of these attributes, the no save states, no skipping, one ending, is also done in another game. A game that is much more replayed and enjoyed. That game being Night in the Woods. Night in the Woods works on an autosave system. There's no save states. And you cannot necessarily skip through certain scenes or dialogue. You can't, you can mash the A button, but beyond that, you can't just like breeze through it. And also in Night in the Woods, there is only one ending. But what sets these two games apart? Well, for one, um, despite how, Snoop Game, sorry, GVH is highly railroaded, there are multiple points of divergence within the story of Night in the Woods, where you could choose where on one day, we're like, hey, I want to go hang out with Greg, and you can spend a day doing a funny minigame with Greg and just having an event with them. Or you can also, during that same day, choose to spend the day with B and do something special with her. So there's reasons to go back. There's good reasons and enjoyable reasons to go back to hit those certain parts again. But on top of that, the game does kind of allow you to have a skipping system where, unlike in GVH, where you can't necessarily skip through dialogue other than like mashing the A button, where you cannot reach certain plot points without going through a million of movie and film before it. In Night in the Woods, you completely have the option to just avoid the world, avoid interacting with the world, and just run directly towards the plot progression points are. And you could just go ahead and just rush instantly to the Snack Falcon and talk to Greg and do the event. And once you're done with that, you could just instantly go back and just run to bed and just end the night off and continue through the game at a much faster way, where the game gives you the ability to sort of cheese it and get through it to play only for the segments you want to see, as well as the entire overworld of the game that you can move and interact your character with. So you can also replay to see all the stuff you missed your first playthrough and see all the stuff you can explore and the people you can talk to. And, well, there's no real need for save states because, as of before, well, sure, it could take a long time reaching certain parts of the game. Because the game allows you to certainly beeline to certain plot progression points, you can get to it easily enough, and the path to getting to it would still be pretty enjoyable. GVH can't necessarily do any of these, where it cannot still be successful without having save states skipping in one ending, because Night in the Woods gives the player much more autonomy and much more things to do, much more ways to interact with the world and the setting as a whole. Where in GVH, you're just watching the characters. There's nothing really to interact. You cannot control Fang in any sense like you can in GVH. So it could be said that it's an unfair comparison to make between the two, since they are almost like two entirely separate games. Well, sure, they may pull similar parts from one another. The core gameplay is entirely in their own field from one another. And to that end, well, if the developers of Co-op knew what kind of game they were making, that, it's a game heavily placed around replayability, it's a choice-driven, story-based game. The main crowd of games like these are obviously going to want to replay it to see every possible choice, to get the most out of that choice-driven story. But by not only making it where, your choices have little impact, and replaying the game is very, very, very sluggish and difficult to get through, it is turning away a core pillar of their audience, a one that will continually revisit and replay through their games because of how just anti-replay they made their game out to be. And they should have seen this beforehand and implemented systems that even Snoop Game had. Where, yeah, you can say that the skip system and the save system was all a part of the Rempe engine, so it's just something that just came with the way they were making their visual novel. But even then, it should be widely known and accepted at this point for this kind of game, for the visual novel type, there should be save systems and skipping, as well as just in general multiple endings, because these are games that cater to replayability by allowing the player so much choice. Choice which GVH ultimately does not revel in. And here I want to go over the themes of the story. The themes, they really, I do not like the way they handled most of their themes. I've often seen the game like heralded as like a very like LGBT game, a game part of the community, a game that helps advocate and push for LGBT themes. But they really, like, sure, they have trans characters. They have Fang. Fang's NB. Rosa's trans. Sage is as well. But, yeah, Reed's gay. There might be more, but who knows. But beyond all that, they never explore LGBT themes, despite having a diverse cast of LGBT characters. They never explore the themes in any meaningful way. Um, there's that one moment with Sage that I exceptionally adore because I feel like that's one theme they handled absolutely well. But other than that one scene with Sage, the only other LGBT theme in the game is the one with Fang and their parents. As mentioned earlier, Fang had a plot line with their parents wherein they were just continually frustrated with how their parents would continue to misgender them or just not understand them, and they would feel really distant from that. And when else they were building it up pretty well throughout the game, and I was first time playing through, interested to see how they take it, how they go with it. Granted, I could tell, I had my guesses, but I liked the way they had built it up. Then Fang's parents just never come home. And after what I can only say is the most disrespectful scene. No, that's. When I saw the scene where it's now like Fang going through the grief of possibly never seeing their parents again, to instantly be hit with the mental flashback of them just partying. Not only was it so totally jarring, that felt disrespectful. That really felt disrespectful. I felt disrespected. And not only that, but with how they built up this theme, where it's something that's been constantly on Fang's mind, just this issue between their parents and them, and how their parents just still don't get it. Where I was waiting for the moment where Fang would have that heart to heart with them, where they would try to explain, everything that they are and make their parents understand. Or make their parents try to understand, just something. What they end up doing at the end, I felt was incredibly disrespectful to just LGBT, the LGBTQ as a whole. For the LGBT, for people who are trans and, gay, queer in any sense of the word, and they come out to their parents, most are not as kind and as welcome. Some people have to live their life without their parents in it because they feel disgusted by a person being who they are. And even for the good ones, the parents that still care for their children after they come out, they just don't get it. They don't respect them enough to just affirm their identity. And so seeing them tackle this theme, well, I didn't think it'd do it in any major or really powerful way. I still thought they treated it respectfully. And the way they just built that theme up, you could tell this tension between them, this issue where they just don't understand Fang, and have it be built up throughout the entire story. But then have it oh no, they're not coming home. And then during the day of Caldera Fest, it just flashes to a moment where Fang's parents are on video call, and they say, "Oh, Fang, you look so beautiful. I am very proud of you for your..." It is so disrespectful. The way they build up that entire theme and then just shoehorn in where magically their parents perfectly understand them and their gender identity. It's so far flung from reality where they did it. It's so disrespectful. This is a theme this is a thing many people struggle with and have trauma over, how their parents have abused them for coming out who they are, or just that struggle with their parents not understanding, where they built up throughout the entire game. And I was waiting for the moment where they'd have that conversation, where there'd be that moment where all that tension, all that buildup is brought into a moment where it's fully out in the open, and the parents either come to understand or fail to. I don't know how they can do it, but the way they just magically make them just understand and respect Fang, despite that's never how that works in the real world, is so disrespectful. My least favorite part about this game as a whole is this plot line, because I feel it is just so disrespectful to people who actually go through that. To have the game just build up so well, And Jin just flip it on and says, like, don't worry, now we just magically understand you because the plot demands us have a good ending. It's. They could have just changed it where, at the end, their parents just still don't understand. But they resolve it to themselves that I don't need the understanding of my parents. I don't need their affirmation where I am who I am. And whether or not their parents think or respect me for that doesn't make me any less of a person. They could have done that. They could have just, I'm just going to cut my parents off. That they're bad people. They could have done that. They could have done anything except just make them magically get it. Because the plot demands a happy ending. It's. I don't want to get too passionate about this. I don't want to get too. I'm trying to be unbiased, but this is frankly something very infuriating. This is something that strikes a chord with me, and I would have preferred than take this plot line, this theme out, than bungle it the way they did. It was just so rushed. It was so rushed. They didn't have the time to probably explore this theme, to probably, bring that moment where they have that moment with their parents. So they just magically make them just respect Fang. Like, that's any way at all how that works in real life. Like, that has ever happened to anyone. It's. I'm moving on. I'm moving on. Another theme I really don't like how they handled is cosmic. The overall, like, theme of cosmic dread. Just coming to find out, like, everything that we lived and just dedicate our life towards matters not, because the world's going to end mere moments from now. Where everything that you've looked forward to in life doesn't matter because now the end is coming. Where I blame this mainly because it's sort of touched on lightly only by Reed. No other character touches on this. Where no other character, like, talks about the asteroid, like what they do, if the world just, like, ends, what they do with their life. And many of the characters don't dedicate themselves to that. It's literally only Reed in, like, sparse moments of Reed where he talks about the asteroid. And even then, it's shoved aside. Up until, chapter 6, or I guess you could say the end of chapter 5, but chapter 6, where people now widely believe that the asteroid is going to come and kill them all. Or not. I'll get to that later. Where, they come to that moment, and that level of cosmic dread, where just a realization of everyone in the friend group, that everything they dedicate their lives to, everything they wanted to be, what they wanted to do, means nothing in the face of the cruel, inescapable reality of the universe. Just built up to nothing. The way that they set it up passively throughout chapters 1 through 5, then have it explode where it's now a reality in 6, and yet have no characters really explore that, where they're like, oh yeah, I'm happy I could spend the end with you. Okay, that's good, but that feels more so like an ending type thing. It's something that where they all resolve, and that's like, the moral of the story, the stuff at the end. There is no actual time or attention paid to the characters going through that level of cosmic dread, of them asking themselves or asking anyone if anything mattered, what's the point of it all? Or just going through the fear and just absolute depression that is realizing nothing matters. Nothing's going to matter. The only character that does that, actually, is Naomi. And I hate how they handled her coming out about that. They handled it in the most disrespectful way possible. Where Naomi reasonably comes out and says, she says, like, I can't, just swallow this. I can't be so, like, calm about this as you all are. Fang losing the band, the Caldera Fest, everything that they've dedicated their life towards and around. I have done so much with my life dedicated to what I want to be in the future, and now that's just taken away. And they were going through it. They were absolutely going through it. And the way the characters, being the muse of the plot, what the themes demand them to say, so they say, well, it doesn't matter, so, just calm down, relax, it doesn't matter, don't, freak out about it. Yeah, there's not much you can do in that situation, but that doesn't mean you aren't any less entitled to your feelings about the matter. You can't just have something ripped away from you, just be like, oh, well, I can't do anything about it, so it's okay. No, you have to feel. It's definitely something to feel, and the fact that Naomi was the only one to go through it, despite there literally being moments of Nasir not sure what he wants to do in the future because he's just so out there. He's so outgoing as a student that he does everything. That he doesn't know what exactly he wants to do. Trish, who wants to be an entomologist. Sage, who wants to be a baker, who wants to do stuff with their life. I don't know about Stella or Rosa because, their characters are just like chopped liver. But still, so many characters have had motives, stuff they want to do with their lives. And the second, it's come to find out where the universe is ending, everything they've ever come to know will end. Or they think it might end. I'm gonna get to this. I assure you. And they're just like, well, okay, yeah. They have this be a core theme of the game, but they don't explore it, only in sparse amounts. And even that, the way they explore it is extremely disrespectful to the topic as a whole. But just being incredibly dismissive, where, well, you can't do anything about it, so why care? Well, there's nothing you can do. So, there's nothing to be gained by just, crying about it now. No, you're supposed to care. You're supposed to feel. You're not robots. Just because something's taken from you doesn't mean you're supposed to, just be okay. And just now I can get into this. The way they handle the oncoming demise of all the characters, they handle in a way which actually undermines the level of cosplay. It makes the characters look bad. Because I might get into this later because it'll be easier to explain then. But ultimately, I just like the way they handled the apocalypse, where they don't explain it. They don't explain what exactly will happen, whether or not, there's an asteroid coming in a week from now, there's an asteroid coming soon, or has a high probability of coming, or it has a high probability. I mean, literally in the story, it said that all the planes are closed because debris is falling from the skies. That's the reason why Fang's parents can't necessarily come home. So I assume there's a very good reality that there realistically is reasons that the world is going to end, or reasons to believe that the world is going to end, but we are told none of it. And because of that, we can't accurately gauge if the way the characters are acting is actually rational or reasonable. I'll get into this. I'll touch on this later, but it's just they really should have told us more to help us, better put ourselves in that story and understand the characters. Because the way it's handled, it makes them all look like giant jerks with how dismissive and uncaring they are of it. It makes them act super unrealistic, where if you knew that everything that you had lived your life around was now meaningless because the world was going to end, you would act differently than if you were, put in the same situation, but it's just that there was a strong chance or a noticeable chance that the world was going to end. It would reasonably affect the story, and because of that, because we don't know the true severity or degree of it, depending on how we view it personally, it makes the characters act extremely unreasonable for how they would in the setting. Where, hey, assuming that these are the final days where it's assured destruction's imminent, why are they not spending time, hanging with their families? Where, especially after the Aurora Borealis moment, where school shuts down because people widely believe, the world's going to end. Why on earth would some people still go to school? Why would Naomi herself want to go to school, knowing the world's going to end? Why would Trish or Nacer or Fang, any character with family, want to still be in Volcano Bluffs? Would you not, if you knew the war was going to end, would you want to do something sporadic, something to make you feel alive? Would you not want to spend the last moments of your life with family, those close to you, or to just venture around the world to see what of it you can see left, to do something, anything, to try to make the most of what's left? But here you have the characters going to school, and on top of that, just Trish, she has a little sister. Why is she not spending her last moments with her little sister? Well, maybe they're not her last moments. Maybe, the asteroid just has a high chance. So it's where it's highly believed to be so, but not really. It just doesn't work unless we have something definitive to work with. I'll go more to this later when I address some counter arguments I have to say at the very end. But touch on this for now. They really should have helped. It really undermines the theme when they don't exactly specify to what extent is the world going to end, because it makes the characters look unreasonable in the way they act if we don't know how imminent or severe the situation is. And also, of course, another big theme of GVH is making the most of the moment. We're living in the moment, not actually worrying about the future. That's how it ties back to that cosmic dread, as I was saying before, where like you can't do anything about it, so why care? So just enjoy the moment type stuff that ties back to the last theme. And I feel like it sort of undermines that very it undermines it. Going back to the cosmic dread, where I feel like to some extent, the making the most moment. I feel like they do work on that theme well enough, but it's shoehorned in at the last minute. And one thing that uh Fang does do is throughout the entire story, they go ahead and just constantly worrying, prepping, focusing on their future with the band and how it ties so much so to their identity, just making sure they make it in the future as a musician. And it just falls flat. Like they build it up. They build up the whole like worrying about the future thing, but they don't have any big payoff to it. Where Fang spent their entire like school year worrying, just stressing about just making it as a musician. Where it's built up so much, but the only payoff you see is the second the asteroid comes around. Um, they instantly just like, well, okay, I'm fine with it. They don't feel. They don't. They don't like lash out about it. They don't. Um, you know, just they don't cry at the cruel, cold, calculating universe. They don't act reasonably as something they've been building up for the longest time. And then, once the moment comes where now, not only will they not have Caldera Fest, they won't have a future. They don't. There's no payoff. It's just like, okay, I get it. They spend the entire time of the story up until like chapter 6 planning for the future and just doing everything to make sure they make their future. But then once they realize, oh, there is no future, it's like, okay, I get it. It really undermines the theme when you just hand fisted in there. I feel like as again, the only person who ever provides any sort of lip service to that cosmic dread or like that just rage against the cold universe is Naomi, and that's honestly my one saving grace for her as a character. And the way that everyone just undermines her, just saying, you can't do anything, who cares? It's it should have been handled better. They should have at least had Fang, the main character, the person who's been building this up this entire story, go through the same thing Naomi has. To have that big climactic moment where they come to understand that ultimately just have to make the most of the moment instead of just like magically coming to the realization the second like a meteor comes. It's like, oh, okay. Well, turns out all the prepping I was doing was all for naught. And the last theme of friendship, where of course sticking together with your friends, doing what you can for your friends. They butchered this theme. Going back to that one scene in chapter 6, I believe, where after the Aurora Borealis, Fang goes ahead to talk to LJ, and they essentially say, look, I've been in business long enough to know there's no reason to do it if not without your friends. The way they portray, it really undermines the whole theme of friendship when the way they portray the friendship is just really toxic. Like, it's literally said as a theme in the story by chapter 6 that there is no reason to go ahead and pursue your own passions if you aren't doing it with your friend. Keep in mind, the context of this moment is that Trish does not want to be a part of the band. They do not see music as their future, as their career. Where they enjoy it as a hobby, but they do not want it to be their future, and they want to pursue entomology, something that they enjoy. And because Trish does not view music to the same regard Fang does, LJ's advice is, well, because your friend doesn't want to make this her future, you shouldn't make it your future either. There's no point to do it, if not for your friends. It's not that Fang's trying to be a sellout. Fang's not trying to just abandon Trish. Trish the one who doesn't want to do it. Trish doesn't want to be a musician. And because of that, the theme is, well, there's no point without your friends. So Fang has also abandoned everything they built up, everything they enjoy and love and want to see as a future, because Fang prefers to be an entomologist than a bassist. It doesn't make sense. Not to mention how, toxic the whole friendship thing is before I mentioned with like Trish and Fang. How, Trish was completely toxic and they never really apologized for what they did. But despite the fact, there is actually a way where an ending, or not an ending, but a way where Trish actually apologizes. If you get max affinity with Trish, if you do anything to everything to please her throughout the story, only then does she apologize for what she did, which she did do. She did do some stuff going back. She was very passive aggressive. She was literally dodging Fang, and told Fang about like not wanting to be a part of the band, only in piecemeal, by just telling them, "Hey, right before LNL," and then just well, it's LNL. We can't really like talk about it. Oh wait, now LNL is over. Gotta go home with stage. Bye. Very, very scummy. And the only way they apologize is if you literally do everything to please Trish, if you get max affinity for her by the end of the game. Which I'm not exactly against that, where okay, you have like better like moments or in character moments with certain characters based on how much you do to cater yourself towards that character. I get that. I like that in games. The problem is the ending relationship between Fang and Trish is exactly the same regardless of whether or not Trish apologizes or not. So Trish can gaslight Fang and make them be the ones apologizing despite the fact she has her fair share of like sins in her closet, but still be just as good a friend or treated just as nice and respectfully as in the ending where she actually apologizes for what she did, as opposed to the ending where they didn't, where it's exactly the same, the way they're treated, the way that Trish is still portrayed as like a good person, doesn't make sense and feels very toxic when it comes back to the themes of friendship. And not to mention, of course, well, family and friendship, going back to how um, they made Nasir a punching stock. It's, I feel like there's multiple points where it was just very rushed and not given enough time to simmer. Most of these themes very rushed. The reason why I hate the way the whole parent coming to understand Fang being NB theme was because they had to rush it, where they built up so well, but because oh wait, the world's ending. Well, I magically understand you. The cosmic dread, the way to just breeze through that, the way to make it just, it all feels. It just feels the themes were kneecapped because of how improperly the story was handled, and because that you can't really look to the themes as a core tenet or like a strong point of the game, because ultimately if you pay any level of scrutiny, it undermines itself. Overall, my three big problems with this game: um, the story is bad. As I said before, some plot lines just don't need to be there. Some plot lines that contribute nothing to the story. Some plot lines are just better not in the story, and there's so many issues with like needing more time to flesh certain things out, which didn't help because the pacing of the story was just so rushed at the very end. It was like, oh no, the asteroid's here, death is coming. Now I need to rush through all the themes and like storylines, resolving them at once. And it could have been better tackled and handled if they didn't have as many plot lines. Where the Naomi Secret Admirer didn't contribute much. The Fang parent one was just handled so horribly. I would prefer it taken out, honestly. The Battle of the Bands one, that's the core one. The whole like Fang in regards to their friends and their future is undermined because now they have to divide themselves against 20 different plot lines. And not to mention how the story just mishandles multiple characters, doesn't do much with them. Um, it definitely, it the story isn't that good, all things considered. As much as I hate to say it, as much as I enjoyed playing through the story the first time, looking back, it's just it could have been handled so much better, and it wasn't. The lack of replayability is also another thing, where this is a choice-driven game, where you really don't want to make any choices. It's not even that you don't even want to make any choices. It's just you can't make any choices that matter, which ties into no impact. Not only because the lack of impact you have when playing the game make you want to replay it less. Because what's to replay? Were you gonna get a different ending? No. But not only that, there's nothing to go. Once you play the game once, you've literally seen all there is to see. There's nothing to go back for. This is a $30 game that you just put 8 hours in and you're one and done with. Because not only is there not much else to get out of the game, but even if you want to get something, the little bit there is out of the game, you have to put in hours just to get to the points you want to see the differences of. And that doesn't mention like if you want to complete this game, you're gonna sink so much time without a guide. Not to mention just how like anti-replayer will see like features are, no save state, no skipping, one ending. Um, it's very very difficult to replay. Where you don't want to like playing through the game the first time is very infuriating because of how poorly the story is handled, and then you have nothing you want to go. You don't even want to go back to see what else could be gleaned out of it because just how anti-replay it was designed to be, and no impact. Whereas when again, when you want to interact with a game and the game doesn't return that interactive effects cast upon the game, it unimmerses the player because there's no stakes. When you have nothing to control, you have nothing to lose. You have nothing to lose, you have nothing to invest yourself in. And these three things, like, okay, if the story was bad, but if you could influence it in certain ways just to see all the ways you could get out of it, it would, it would give you a reason to try to replay it to see like all the ways you could like interact with it. Even if the story was bad and had no impact, at least you could replay to glean what you could out of it. And even if it was no replayability and no impact where you can't change the story, if the story was good, that's justification enough to go ahead and like sit through it again. But because these three core tenets all fail, there's really nothing to revisit this game for. And just on top of that, the bottom line is there's not a single part of this game to enjoy. The gameplay, the rhythm segments you don't even have to play, that are extremely easy, that utilize the same controls for two different mechanics, making it extremely easy. They could totally avoid when playing the game, or the extremely simplistic and frankly just filler mini games. No, the story went over that. Not really much there. The plot lines really do tend to fall into themselves. So no. The themes, I yapped so much about that. No. LGBT themes? Barely. There aren't any. And there could have been. There really could have been. Like, come on. Rosa is trans. Reed is gay. And even that was shoehorned in. Like, there were so many opportunities for them to explore gay themes. Or just, like, queer themes throughout this story. And they don't. They only do it through Fang. But even then, it's hand-fisted a happy ending. Replaying the game to try to, like, no. The music, you don't even have to replay the game for the music. You could just, I just watched it on YouTube. Like, the music's good. That's one of the strongest thing I enjoy. But there's not a single pillar of this game to enjoy. Not one thing you can look at this game is like, oh, I like it for the gameplay, or the story, or the themes. Just nothing there. Like, I encourage anyone who's seen this far into the video, who disagrees with me, or at least disagrees with me on this point, please tell me. I'm curious. I'm really curious. I don't want to tape this game. But as a game, there's nothing there to enjoy. If anyone is here and, like, hears me, could you just please tell me, what do you enjoy about this game? What do you return to it for? What do you like about it? I want to know. I really want to know. Not to try to deconstruct it, but just I really don't know what is there to enjoy about this game. And it sucks. I like this game. When I was first playing it, I was so tense. I was so excited. I was like, oh my god. I was like, my heart was pounding during the rhythm segments because I wanted Fang to win the battle bands. I thought that if I lost, it might influence the story poorly. So I did everything I could to be as good as I can and as invested as I can into this story. And then it just falls flat. It really. I expected more. I expected more co-op, and I'm frankly disappointed. I'm disappointed at the end of the day. Where I like this game, I do. There's still so much I like about this game, especially my first time playing. There's so many memories I had playing this game, but it's not a good game, and there's nothing to return to it for. And it sucks saying that when I wanted this to be good. And here are some defenses, I guess you say, of the game. I'm going to go explore. That I've seen more commonly. By more commonly, I mean on the fandom page. But some defenses of some of the things that I simply feel do not stand, where one is how they argue, it is unrealistic that a huge group of people would show up to a random dinosaurs concert, which I feel like, well, yes, that is true. Where as it was defended on the fandom page, where the defense is Caldera Fest is said repeatedly throughout the game to be a huge music concert where tons of people attend, and the dinosaurs are shown to be in a state of doom and gloom, and many wishing for something cheerful. And the defense essentially going, the entire town didn't attend, only enough to fill up the school roof, and multiple other people who promote concerts like LJ attends, and Sage and Stellar shown distributing posters, raising awareness for the concert for anyone who's there. And this outlook also disregards how Ruin Drone's, catching up some reputation. I still feel like, realistically, and then again, this ties back to before, as I was saying, how you really need to know the scale of the apocalypse to properly gauge whether or not people are acting realistically as they win the situation. Where it's like, hey, we might die, then yeah, it makes sense why they'd all show up. But if there's a meteor realistically coming, I think people would have much bigger priorities than to attend a rock concert where maybe might spend time with their family, make the most of their life while they still have it. Anything other than attend a rock concert with just like other people. I feel like even then it technically goes against what like some people like said, like LJ who attends despite them strictly saying, yeah, I'm not going to attend. They come anyway because who doesn't love happy endings? Either way, I feel like this one isn't like a huge point. Like, yeah, I feel like it's more endemic of a much larger issue. That being how just at multiple points, because of how improperly the world building and just the apocalypse has been set up, it's hard to say what is realistic, a realistic like public reaction to this kind of stuff, because we don't know the nature of the apocalypse. We're like, yeah, like I do feel like it is pretty unrealistic. One, that the school would allow this, and two, they would be able to properly even set it up. Okay, like just think of the government. You think the government would just let people? It costs money to like have school lights be on for a school to run. So it was pretty unrealistic at first. When despite the fact school had been canceled, that people still go to school. Like Naomi, for instance, in that one montage scene at the start of chapter 6. Like I feel like there's a lot of things unrealistic about it, but it's like arguing against the currents, trying to say to what extent it is unrealistic because we just don't know the nature of the apocalypse. Next one, another one argument made against the game, against Fang. That Fang made the concert about themselves since it's selfish. That one, I disagree. That one that fandom base was trying to refute. I do agree that this is frankly just a moot point where it's constantly reestablished and reaffirmed throughout the story, especially at this end, where this isn't about them. This is them just doing something to try to like, resist against the darkness of just giving up and gloom, and how everyone else it's a friend thing. Like this one is a moot point. Like yeah, I agree with the fandom here. This is a stupid point. And the ending makes the entire game pointless because everyone dies. Well, you can't even say that because, as again, we don't know the nature of the apocalypse. And even then, the game isn't rendered pointless because everyone dies. There's still, themes, albeit poorly handled themes, but themes that the game's trying to accomplish. Where it's, living in the moment, enjoying what you can of life. Well, sure, like they were hoping for the future, but still at the end of the day, they'd come around to still make the most of what they currently had. Even if the story had a poor way of getting that across to the player, that is a very moot, and I feel like cherry picked point. I'm not trying to cherry pick here. I'm just like, I literally just went to the Goodbye Volcano High fandom page and went to a section where they essentially just target like certain criticism made about like the ending, which I can argue these feel pretty cherry picked, but you know, it's I'll also take the time to go through it. I'll love to go through more rebuttals if anyone has them of what I've been saying or whatnot, because honestly, I just love seeing the ways I can still continue to explore and dissect this game. Where even if I don't think it's the greatest game, I feel like there's a lot that can be learned from it. Of more often not what to do and what not to do. More typically what not to do. And the last point, it does not show whatever there is an impact at all, referring to the asteroid, as doing so dilutes the core theme. What would you do if the end was potentially happening soon? Where I completely disagree with this point. Um, where I understand if you don't want to show like the impact, but to not even like explain it or whatever it is, it doesn't dilute the theme. What would you do if the end was potentially happening soon? Well, gee, if I knew if the end was potentially happening soon, the first thing I do is figure out what is that potential. Is it a high potential? Is it a low potential? Because realistically, the end could potentially happen soon right now. All we would need is a solar flare, and the world would end. There's currently like a war going on where countries have nuclear weapons. The war could end realistically at any point in time, but people don't, do the stuff they did in GVH because, frankly, there was a much more realistic possibility of the world ending soon. So the core thing of like, what if the world was potentially ending soon? That can be said of right now. The world is potentially ending. It could potentially end at any moment, but it doesn't. The whole reason where it becomes realistic is the probability of it ending. Where if there's an asteroid heading towards the Earth and debris raining from the skies, um, there is a lot of stuff I would make sure I do. Where, like, finally getting to this point, if I was Fang's parents, and because we're all pterodactyls that can fly, granted, it's never explained. There's a lot. One thing I dislike, also, going back to how improperly paced and established many things are within the story. Like, yeah, keep in mind, an entire school year happens over the events of Goodbye Volcano High. Good luck trying to establish any sort of timeline. But on top of that, the fact Fang's parents have been essentially ghosts for the good portion of a school year, and they've been not only surviving without them, but on top of that, they're somewhere on what, a business trip. We don't even know. They're doing something somewhere, and that with the world ending, knowing that they may never see their like children again, if you were in their situation, wouldn't you just? We're thinking because we don't know. The game hides so much information from us. The story hides so much information from us that it's so difficult to try to get any cohesive statement or stance on any of it. Because frankly, we need more information to truly gauge how either like moral or sensible these people are. Because for all we know, they could just be like 2 miles away. Fang's parents, that is, or two like countries. But even then, knowing that people can fly in this world, if you were Fang's parents, would you not, fly to Fang? We need to know what the impact is, what the probability is of death happening, what's going to happen. We need to know that because if we don't properly know what is the potential of the end happening, it makes the characters look extremely bad and stupid if they don't act in the proper ways. Where if the ending was going to happen, like, let's say a week from the Goodbye Volcano concert, do you think the parents of all those kids would let their kids walk out and not want to spend every last waking moment with them before the end hits? Would they not want to go venture the world and make the most of what they can, do something frantic, walk naked in the streets, do anything to try to resist against the dying of the light that is their existence, everything they've ever known? They don't. I feel like many things are just unrealistic, but I can't even say that because we have no scale, we have no knowledge of what's happening, and keeping us in the dark does more to harm the story than get across any grandiose themes like this. Where, yeah, sure, it might dilute the core theme, but no, realistically, by not showing whatever there is at impact, it doesn't dilute the core theme. It wouldn't dilute the core theme, but by refusing to do so, it dilutes our respect and understanding of the characters. Where, okay, if like school's canceled and the end is nigh, I and I can assume so many other people would not spend time in school knowing that like in 2 months or a week or a day or who knows is going to blow up. I would do something I would want to do. And it also doesn't make sense where Naomi is like still upset over like how like the world is ending, they had so much stuff planned, so much stuff they want to do. But at the same time, then spend the last of her days in school doing school board meetings. It doesn't make sense. Make it make sense. And there really is a lot more to yap, but frankly, I've gone over my main review of GVH. Once again, I'm more than glad to hear anyone's rebuttals or counter arguments they have to any one of my points. I just love understanding or expanding my understanding of games. And I wanted my first one to be GVH because this is one that I've had so much to say on for such a long time. A game that I've had such a personal connection with. And I hope anyone who's sat through it this long enjoyed what they did, as mediocre as my mic may be, or the quality of all this is. Um, I enjoyed talking about this. Well, I got passionate at times. It's something I've been wanting to say for a long time. And yeah, I won't keep you any longer. Thanks for listening to the video, and I hope this helps your understanding of the game, or just game making, game development, anything. I don't know outros, so I'm just gonna end it here. See you, and once again, I am Chromie Fang, signing out.